Join me in welcoming Mike Richmond to the stage. Mike, thanks a lot, man.
Good morning. Welcome to San Diego. You know, it's really great to be at a conference where I don't have to wear a suit. And in a job like mine, I think sometimes I'm in service of what you would call the conference industrial complex. So that's where a consulting firm that gets a lot of money from clients sets up a conference, and they invite their clients to get unconfused by people like me, and at the same time reinforce the idea that the conference organizers and the analysts that work for them are indispensable. So I go to these things, and I say what I think I should say, and the audience, they react with. Anyway, it's a pretty good business model for the firms. I don't really know that the attendees are necessarily well served. But one of the things I really like about an event like this, put on by the Linux Foundation, is that it's about actual technology, and and there's not too much. There's not a lot of BS at a conference like this. In fact, very, very little. And so that's why I think an event like this is special. Now, we're sponsoring this conference, and we also sponsor the IoTivity project, which has a track this afternoon. And IoTivity is an important piece of what we think it's going to take to build the Internet of Things. And I hope today you'll have a chance to learn a little bit more about it. Now, you don't need to be a member of OCF to participate in IoTivity. It's a standard open source project, Apache and so on. OCF, our product is paper and certification, but the two groups work together in ways that I think are pretty interesting and novel. So here's a list. This is a complete advertisement for the sessions this afternoon. You look at, we have sessions on the architecture, what's next in IoTivity, how to talk to the implementation using JavaScript. We sit between transport and below applications. So we've got a session where we're going to talk about, hey, how do you marry something like thread, which actually kind of goes up to where we stop, or to where we start, excuse me, and how do you bind those two together to create a more complete solution? And then we're going to have a session that discusses some interoperability possibilities between IoTivity and AllJoyn. And then an actual product developer, someone who's actually built an appliance out of IoTivity. So I encourage you to go to those sessions. On Wednesday, we're also having a developer workshop that you can sign up for, and I think that's much more in-depth. It'll be off-site. It's a few block walk away from here, and you can register for that. And I'll put this QR code up at the end as well, so that you can check that out. We still have some spots available. Okay, so let's go back to our poor business conference attendees. Why are they so confused? Well, it might have something to do with the fact that there are a bunch of groups like mine all claiming to solve the problem of device interoperability that overlap with groups saying they're going to solve device interoperability. Now, this is all very well intentioned, and I'll just say, if just having an open source project by itself were sufficient to ensure that devices would interoperate, then you wouldn't need a group like mine, because our group is producing specs. And if all you needed was a spec, then you wouldn't have people starting open source projects to worry about device interoperability. But I think it's important to realize that you need both. You need a specification and you need implementations, including open source implementations, if interoperability is not going to be dictated by a single company. Now, there's a technology aspect to this as well. You look at some of these groups and you say, well, wait a minute. Is the need for a device interoperability, device discovery, does that have to be different in Japan than in Europe? Well, or in North America? Why are there geographic specific groups like that? That doesn't make a lot of sense necessarily. Is it really that different, for automotive versus, some other industrial market? Well, maybe it's different up here, and maybe the radios have to be different. Maybe down here it's not even a radio, but in the middle, is it really that different? And so, that's why we've sort of picked out this horizontal slice and said, hey, that's what we're gonna specialize in. And if our judgment is incorrect, then yeah, maybe we're the ones that shouldn't be doing the work. But we think that there is a lot of commonality across markets and geos, and so that's why we keep at it. And I think it's worth remembering that in the long run, these kinds of horizontal standards and open source working together is what wins. America Online, Prodigy, CompuServe, these were really big, but they were very, very vertical. The information revolution that we're surrounded by today didn't really take off until you had platforms that were both open source and managed by standards. Right? So the W3C and the browser vendors, they've had a long and interesting relationship, with each other over the years. But the result has been fantastic for the information economy that we all depend on. And now here we are kind of, in the last few years, kind of starting over with the idea of this Internet of Things. And, I think this is how, whether you think that web protocols should be used for IoT or not, the business model, if you will, or the decision architecture of how these things get figured out in the industry, I think the web is a pretty good way of seeing, what works. And that's what we're trying to drive in our work. So I don't think the answer is that complicated, but you don't make a lot of money as an analyst if you give simple answers. So these poor folks are probably going to continue to get charged to go to conferences, and I'll probably continue pulling out the suit and going and speaking at them. Now, I think it's interesting that a hardware company, a CPU architecture company, sees this maybe clearly than a lot of people do. This is a slide from the ARM Investor Day from last fall. And basically what they're saying is, there aren't enough of you guys to build IoT. So they estimate that there are 600,000 embedded developers in the world. And even if hardware's free, right? Moore's Law, hardware's cheap, and that's why Moore's Law, is going to drive this great explosion of IoT. If every application has to be custom built by people as talented as you are, there just aren't enough of you to build all the IoT applications sufficient to make that hockey stick of revenue happen. And so what they're saying is somehow we have to bring in all these developers that have learned how to do development on mobile, maybe on Android, with Java, or maybe they're web programmers. Somehow we have to pull these people in, and that means there can't be the same level of customization in every single IoT design than what you see today. It's just not going to work. One of the other things I really like about the Linux Foundation, other than the fact that they host these great conferences, is that they don't try to pick winners and losers. If you have a project, you have an idea, and you've got open source governance, you have the right way of working, and you have people that want to work together. The Linux Foundation will host you. And I think over the last few years, they've done a great job providing a home for a number of really, really cool projects. And they don't try to say, well, we already have one of those, forget your idea, you should not do it because we've already got one. And so, as it happens, the Linux Foundation hosts two efforts, the All Seen Alliance and IoTivity, that are basically viewed as competitors, and they're under the same roof. Now, we're doing pretty well. We started OIC a while back and grew nicely, and then we acquired the assets of UP&P, and then more recently we've started OCF, and we're very, very proud of it, and that's the organization I represent. We're doing really well, and All Seen is also doing really well, about the same number of members. And you could say we're the Jets and they're the Sharks or whatever. And I spend a lot of time in different forums explaining why we're better than they are, and I'm not going to do that to you now. But basically, it's two groups of companies that are trying to do the right thing and convinced that their way is the right way. But what we have in common is a belief that multiple companies should decide how IoT works, that it shouldn't just be one company that decides, no matter how talented or vertical they might be. And I think that's an important thing to remember, is that we do share this common view of how this should be done, and that's kind of how the web works and how the web was decided. And it's worked out pretty darn well. So everyone wants to know, okay, so what comes next? And I'm here to announce that I have no idea. So I can't tell you how it's going to turn out, but I can tell you that we've started to figure out how to go about figuring it out. Qualcomm, Microsoft, Electrolux unified with OIC to create OCF, and that's a start. And we've committed to a kind of interoperability between the two. So instead of saying, okay, they're there and maybe they'll go away, and we're here and they're thinking, well, maybe we'll go away, let's figure out how we can get these things to work together and then see where it goes. And to talk a little bit about how we might go about that, I'm going to introduce someone who knows a little bit about these technologies, Greg Burns. Greg actually invented AllJoyn a few years ago, so please welcome Greg Burns.
Thank you, Mike.
So Greg, you've presumably now, in your old job and in your new job, studied these two architectures very, very closely. There's an old saying that arguments in academia are so vicious because the stakes are so small. So objectively speaking, are these two architectures, fundamentally so different that they can't be made to work together?
First of all, the goals are the same, right? The idea of having standardized data models, standardized wire protocols, proximal first with cloud connectivity. Just coming at it from that standpoint, there's an awful lot of common terminology, a lot of agreement on the approach. So looking at the two, there's actually more in common, both from the philosophical standpoint as opposed to the specifics of the implementation. They do very similar things. They have discovery. They use IP multicast for discovery. And once you've discovered something, you then access it via a data model that is known to both sides. Now, there are some features of each technology that I would say are best in breed. And so, my vision, and this is one of the things I'm going to be talking about at 4 o'clock session, my vision is that if we were to bring the components from each of those technologies together, we will evolve something that is better than either of them individually, because they each have their strengths and weaknesses. The specifics of the wire protocol are really kind of secondary. They don't matter that much. And we can argue about, is an object-oriented approach versus a RESTful architecture better, or ultimately it comes down to somewhat personal preferences, because you can do exactly the same things with either technology and it doesn't matter. The bigger picture is that we really do benefit as an industry and a community if we have one standard. And my hope is we can get there.
That's my hope too. Okay, Greg, I'll be in your session this afternoon. Thanks very much.
Okay.
So the political part of this is going to be with us even if we start making the technical problem less severe, even if we create this interoperation. And people ask me about the political aspect of this, because that's kind of part of my job. And people ask, well, you guys squabble so much in public. When's this ever going to end? Now, so as you can tell, I'm a little bit older. I was actually born in 1952, which is well after World War II. But Winston Churchill was always a political hero of mine. And he said something that encourages me in this grand project of unification that we've started with OCF that I'd like to leave you with.
This is not the end. It is not even the beginning of the end. But it is perhaps the end of the beginning.
So I ask your patience as we figure it out. I hope you'll use the conference time productively. You'll learn a lot. I certainly hope you'll consider learning more about IoTivity, both at the sessions today and our Developer Day. And I thank you very much for your attention this morning. Thanks.